Welcome to a new Fair's Fair review, specifically working on games today. And the game we're reviewing today is one of my favorite types of games ever to exist. I know what you're thinking, MOBAs? Really? You? Nah, bitch, free. Free-to-play games have always had a really special place in my heart because it's one of the few games that I always knew I had the money to play. But conversely, free-to-play games are also, well, kind of a different breed than your average pay-to-play game. So let's jump right into it. And free-to-play games, by the way, will have a whole extra category to address a few issues that is unique to them and not something that you will often find in games that you paid for the whole game up front. Let's get started on story. Was it good or bad? Well, the story in League of Legends, totally irrelevant. The game itself, that is the game you actually play in League of Legends, has literally nothing to do with the lore that is, around all the champions. It's completely flavor text added on. And don't get me wrong, the lore is really in-depth and really cool, but you don't actually need to know any of it or indeed care about it to play and enjoy the game. In fact, they've put a surprising amount of effort into the lore for a game that really doesn't require any of it. They have a whole multiverse of alternate timelines and alternate realities around which that it has all these characters in. And it's weird that they have so many vastly different fleshed out universes for you to explore inside of their lore when none of it actually matters to the game. Unless you want to get the flavor text and taunt phrases from Fiddlesticks and understand what they mean. By the way, Fiddlesticks, nice guy, I like him.
Help me!
Anyway, yeah, apparently when you taunt other players with him, he will say things depending on what the other champion is in order to bring up past traumas from their life. So the story is good and really large, even if it did have to be retconned a couple 100,000 times before it got to its current state, but it isn't important, and you don't actually need to know any of it. Most free-to-play games do seem to be pretty separate from their storyline, or at least not requiring you to know the lore in order to play the game, but League seems to take a special place among even free-to-plays at the lore just not fucking mattering at all. In fact, the game itself is not canon. That is the actual rift and destroying the Nexus and everything to do with the whole game is outside of the canon of the world that the game comes from. So let's move on to other things, like gameplay. Is it fair and balanced? Now, a lot of people are going to jump into these comments. It's so unfair, it's so unbalanced, it's awful. Even I'm guilty of pretty much perma-banning Vayne because I hate her. I can't play around her. She is absolutely awful, but that's not because Vayne is a broken champion. It's because I'm just not good at playing around her abilities. But other than that, down in the ELO where we actually are, not up in the professional levels, granted if you're a professional, then yeah, there are some champions that are just distinctly better than others. But if you're under the top 3 ranks, then how good a champion is really will have very little effect on your total gameplay. How familiar you are with it and how good you are at playing it will have a much bigger impact than any 0.001% increase to your damage on a particular ability. Overall, I think the game is fairly well balanced. With the new items, you can straight up just itemize to ruin someone's day, even if your champion itself is not good against them. So balance-wise, outside of the brand new champions that just come out, and fresh after rework champions, it's pretty well done. There isn't a single champion in the game that I would think that there just is no way to play them and do well, except maybe Twisted Fate, because it's far more important as to what you can do as a team in the whole of the game than it is about some tiny number on your character. Utilizing the character well is more important than the character being just straight up good. Onward now to, is it pay to win? No. Nope. There are plenty of free-to-play games out there that are pay to gain buffs, pay to skip the grind, and indeed pay to win. League of Legends is not one of those. There is literally nothing you can purchase with any amount of any currency that would give you a buff in-game. Some people say that certain skins are, slightly better or give you advantages. In fact, there was one Gragas skin which, due to a particularly hard-to-see ability of his, a professional player called it pay to win. And while, yes, in a massive clusterfuck fight in a professional game, it being slightly harder to see is definitely a bonus, again, we're talking about the casual player, not people who intend to make a career out of this. And contrary to the belief of most people playing League of Legends, you're not going to make a career out of this. So yeah, the money is entirely for skins, emotes, or fun wards, or just buying extra champions. And now onto the real hard-hitting one of the gameplay section. Is it easy to learn, start, or be good at? And here's where we have an issue, as there was this really weird mix-up where the dictionary company that sent a dictionary to Riot Games accidentally misdefined the word curve, like in difficulty curve. They defined it as a sharp and violent turn upward, because the difficulty curve of League of Legends fresh out the gate is like hitting a brick wall at 70 miles per hour without any kind of protection. You are going in raw dog and hard, and you will be splattered on impact. Some people like to bring up that you will end up queued with people who are much higher levels with you, but let's be clear, level has very little to do with how good you are at the game. I've seen level 100s absolutely dunk on level 500s, because once you get above level 40 or so, it all becomes the same, and it matters more as to how well you learn from your mistakes, and your level doesn't matter past there, because you can just gain more level by playing a lot, and if you play a lot of games really shittily, you'll be really high level. But learning how to play the game is absolutely amazingly difficult. It is horrible to jump into this game if you have no idea what you're doing. It's one of those games where you almost have to have someone who already plays to get you into it, because you're going to need their advice. The tutorial that Riot offers is not adequate for the complexity of the system they've built. The new items, the mythic items, the legendary items. How do you farm? What's proper CS counts? How should I be judging when to poke? What's kiting? What's macro play? What dragons can I afford to give up? What's the best team comps? What are the interactions between the various characters? And with hundreds of characters, it's really, really important that you know interactions. I play a lot of Swain, and here's a neat fact. Yasuo's Wind Wall does not block Swain's Q, and I have found exactly one Yasuo in the history of ever who actually knew that, and everyone else got really upset when I was queuing them through their Wind Wall, which is supposed to stop projectiles. Swain's Q is not a projectile. Neither is Annie's W, I don't believe. And these tiny interactions can cost you your entire lane, because people use Yasuo thinking they're going to counter Swain, but in reality you can only block his E, and everything else he uses goes right through all of your defenses. Yasuo is not a counter to a Swain. Unless of course you're really good and know how to play around Swain's ability, the best you can hope for is winning later in the game, because laning phase, you're probably not going to get ahead unless there's a big skill gap. Or, you know, jungle attention, but that's part of the macro play. What is macro play? It's playing for the whole game rather than just for your individual lane that you happen to be in. What are good routes for the jungle? What jungle mobs can you afford to ignore? What items should you build against different people? And it recommends certain items for you, but I found myself going against the build that it recommends a lot of the time because I just have a different strategy in mind than it did. What's a good vision score? How focused should you be on red wards? Here's a tip. If you have money for a red ward, you should have a red ward. What places are you more likely to find wards in if they're in your jungle? How do you identify when they're kiting? How do you identify when they're baiting? This game has so many intricacies to it that it's really hard to just jump right into, and more than a few people probably jumped in, found themselves hit by that brick wall of difficulty, and just jumped right back out because there was no one there to help them with that. If you're trying to get into League of Legends, my advice for you is find someone who knows how to play and have them help you learn. But of course, selecting someone who isn't going to tilt off the face of the planet is also very important. Which brings us to our final point, the player base. Is it very helpful? No, it's not. In fact, if you don't know your champion or you play really bad and you're anything above a level 30, people are absolutely assholes half the time. And while, yes, the community has gotten much, much better, a lot of the really, really toxic people moved on to Valorant and Overwatch, mainly Overwatch. But Sharon Noble's less toxic now, and you could even go there and, you know, hang around in the outskirts. But if you head into ranked, it's pretty much like setting up on top of the elephant's foot. Less toxic does not mean safe. There are even people who spend their time in games intentionally talking to the enemy team, trying to convince the enemy team that it is one of their teammates' fault they are losing solely, and therefore disrupting any kind of teamwork and breeding contempt in the enemy team. That means that in normal and even ranked games, there's an entire strategy around just disrupting the enemy by encouraging them to be toxic so they lose. And I get it, I get the tilt. It can be hard when you're on like an 8-game losing streak. It can suck. But tilting and getting upset about it is never going to fix anything. Getting overly competitive, especially in normal games, is never going to fix anything, but the players in this game don't seem to get that. One of the games I played in preparation for this video is really telling on this. The enemy team had a Sylas. He excels at jumping in on top of people and stealing magic from other people. He's really, really hard to get off of you once he's on top of you, and oh my god, is he powerful if you let him keep hitting you. Like, he will wreck your shit inside and out if you let him on top of you. And yes, we're still talking about Sylas, not the Honorable Officer Nottingham. That's an inside joke with my viewers. Meanwhile, I was playing Xerath, a mage that excels at being very, very far away. He is literally the artillery champion, but he's squishy as fuck. So, naturally, Sylas was doing really well in the laning phase, the early part of the game when everyone's still pretty much just hanging out in their lanes, killing minions for gold. You know, farming up for actual battles. Well, he was absolutely kicking my shit in that whole laning phase. He was pushing under turret, he was doing huge amounts of damage, and I kept having to run away from lane, giving him lots of free time to just spend beating up my turret. I was losing farm, I was doing terrible, but I was refusing to let him get the kills. Then his team made a very ill-advised dive under turret, trying to kill me there, and both immediately died. This is where things started going downhill, because with that gold, I finished my primary item and started roaming around the map. I couldn't fight him, but I could fight the rest of his team, and I could stand behind my allies while doing it. Then came the top lane debacle, which I think is where he finally tilted over the edge. First up, this wonderful clip. Now, after destroying me in lane and pushing me out with, well, a frankly terrifying amount of farm on me at one point, it's probably really, really upsetting that I can now walk up and just fight him. But then, well, first time didn't work, so second time's the charm. He came back to the top lane, trying to take the tower while we weren't looking, and this event happened.
Team's turret has been destroyed. Red team has slain the dragon. Killing spree.
That has to be one of the most aggravating things I've ever seen. The outplay on my part wasn't even all that impressive. I'm just really frustrating to run after once I've got my items and can move around and cast all my spells in quick succession. And after his team really didn't manage to dive in behind and stop me from playing artillery like my champion's supposed to, it's probably really upsetting that, well, you know, you can't fight me anymore, even when he had all the advantages. And he started playing much, much worse, which is why I was able to kite him out like that. And immediately after this particular outplay, he left the game. There's the toxicity. He got inside his own head, got upset at his team, and then decided to just leave the game. And while I did feel for him because that's probably a really upsetting circumstance, I did actually report him because leaving the game is still a bitch move. If he had just gotten himself under control and played it out, he probably would have been able to turn the game around. His team was able, they had a decent fight on the field. But because he left and turned it into a 4v5, there really was no contest anymore. So to summarize, the story is good, but not important, and never actually referenced in the game. The gameplay is fair and balanced on every level other than really high ranking, at which point it's a completely different field, and I'd have to defer you to the experts in that field, like the casters at professional games. It is in no way pay to win, there is no way to pay to win, you can't even pay to give yourself an advantage. And despite these two incredibly good points, it is painful to learn if you don't have someone to help you. It is a brick wall of difficulty and terminology that you have to actually research in order to get good at. Learning all the interactions between all the abilities of all the champions takes a huge amount of time. And the fanbase, despite being less toxic now than it was before, is still really fucking toxic. Would I recommend League of Legends to people? Well, that depends. To a friend of mine that I talk to and hang out with regularly? Yeah, probably, because then I could help them get good at it. To a random person who has no one to help them get good at it? Only if you want to look up how to play from some beginner's guides on YouTube. Because otherwise, jumping into the water right away is definitely going to be a bit of a shock. And I wouldn't recommend it. So overall, I'd have to give League of Legends a pretty low score, a 70 at best, which is a C. It's certainly not unplayable and it's a fun game and all, but there's simply no ignoring the flaws that are there. And it doesn't help that you have to pretty much relearn interactions every time a new champion comes out or they rework an old one, because now you need to know how it interacts with all the other abilities. And what this means for their new item builds, what you're going to want to start with, what lane you're going to do now, what champions they're better against now, and all the new styles of play that you're gonna have to learn because they changed one champion. But hey, let me know, did I leave something out? Is there some part of League that I'm not mentioning? Do you think it deserved a higher or, God forbid, a lower score? I won't give it an F because it is a competently made game, but, you know, let me know what you think. Head down to the comments. Do you even play? Have you ever heard of it? Do you think you might try it now that you've heard of it? Because once you get into it, I'll admit, I have a lot of fun. But yeah, like, follow, and subscribe if you like my content, and similar to the League of Legends community, be angry, but do it entertainingly here.